Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you a powerful story that will stir all of your senses. Let's meet Alaric Sanderson, a 70-year-old retired criminal detective who has always been guided by logic and concrete evidence. But his life completely changed when he faced death during the 2020 pandemic. What he saw on the other side will leave you speechless and undoubtedly challenge everything you believe about life and death. So before we start this surprising journey, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and hit the notification bell to get all the updates. Get ready to discover what really happens after death. My name is Alaric Sanderson. I'm 70 years old and I am a retired criminal detective. Throughout my career, I was always guided by logic, facts, and concrete evidence. My mind was trained to seek tangible answers, to solve mysteries based on solid proof. The idea of something beyond what we can see and touch always seemed like a fantasy to me, a way for people to cope with the fear of the unknown. I grew up in a pragmatic family where science and reason were valued above all. My parents taught me to question, to seek logical explanations for everything around me. This mindset served me well in my career as a detective, where meticulous observation and deductive reasoning were essential tools. Over the years, I witnessed many disturbing things in my line of work. I dealt with heinous crimes, with human cruelty in its rawest form. These experiences only reinforced my skeptical view of the world. To me, life was what we could see and experience here and now. Death, I believed, was simply the end, a definitive closure, with no mysteries or continuations. I never gave much attention to stories of near-death experiences or accounts of life after death. To me, they were just products of the human imagination, perhaps hallucinations caused by a brain deprived of oxygen. I saw them as comforting tales that people told themselves to ease their fear of the unknown. But life has an interesting way of surprising us, of shaking our deepest convictions. In March of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was sweeping the world, my life and my perspective on existence was about to change drastically. I was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life and death. An experience that would make me question the very foundations of my understanding of reality. A journey that began in a hospital bed in Pensacola, Florida, where I was fighting for my life against an invisible enemy. What happened next is something I am still trying to fully comprehend. It's a story that defies the logic and reason I held so dear. But it's a story I need to tell, not just for others but for myself. Because what I experienced in those moments between life and death fundamentally changed who I am and how I see the world. This is my story, my account of a journey beyond life as we know it. A journey that led me to question everything I believed to be true and made me see a universe much vaster and more mysterious than I had ever imagined. It all began in March 2020. The world was in chaos due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I, like many others, ended up contracting the virus. At first, I thought it was just a severe flu. After all, I had always been healthy, even at 70 years old. But I quickly realized I was dealing with something much more serious. The high fever wouldn't break, the dry cough worsened with each passing day, and gradually, I began to have difficulty breathing. My daughter, Eleanor, insisted that I go to the hospital. Reluctantly, I agreed. Little did I know that this decision would mark the beginning of a journey that would change my life forever. At the hospital in Pensacola, Florida, I was quickly diagnosed with COVID-19. My condition deteriorated rapidly. The medical team struggled to stabilize my breathing, but I could see the concern in their eyes, even through their protective equipment. Within hours, I was transferred to the ICU. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses rushed around, connecting me to various machines. The sound of heart and respiratory monitors filled the air. I heard fragments of conversations. Critical oxygen saturation. Consider intubation. Risk of multiple organ failure. Amid the chaos, I saw Eleanor's face. She was there, wearing full protective gear, her eyes filled with tears and fear. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but even I didn't believe that at the time. A doctor approached me, his voice grave and serious even through the mask. "Mr. Sanderson, your condition is critical. We need to put you on a ventilator and connect you to an ECMO machine to support your heart and lungs. Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to speak. The doctor hesitated for a moment before adding, "I must be honest with you. Your chances of survival are only 3%. At that moment, I felt a cold chill run through my body. I, who had always lived by logic and numbers, suddenly found myself confronted with a statistic I didn't want to accept. 3%. It was almost nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt true fear of death. As the medical team prepared to intubate me, I looked at Eleanor one last time. I wanted to memorize every detail of her face, to tell her how much I loved her, to apologize for all the times I had been an absent father due to work. But there was no time. The last thing I heard was the doctor counting down. 3, 2, 1. And then, darkness. The world around me disappeared. The sounds of the machines, the voices of the doctors, even the sensation of my own body, all were gone. In that moment, I didn't know if I was alive or dead. Everything I knew, everything I believed, seemed to have been erased in an instant. Little did I know that this darkness was only the beginning. What would come next would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the very nature of reality. My journey beyond life was about to begin. The darkness that enveloped me after the intubation didn't last long. Suddenly, I found myself in a completely different place. I was in a dark tunnel, but I didn't feel fear or claustrophobia. It was a strange feeling, as if I was floating, free from the weight and limitations of my physical body. The tunnel seemed to stretch infinitely before me, but in the distance, I could see a point of light. It was a soft light, not blinding, but incredibly alluring. I felt an inexplicable urge to move toward it. I wasn't walking or flying in the conventional sense. It was more like my consciousness was shifting through the tunnel. As I moved forward, I noticed that the walls of the tunnel weren't solid. They seemed to be made of an ethereal substance, almost like smoke or mist, but with a glow of their own. Occasionally, I glimpsed images in those walls, flashes of memories from my life. I saw my childhood, my parents, moments from my career as a detective, the birth of my daughter. It was as if my entire existence was being played out around me. The light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter as I approached. It wasn't the pure white light I had always imagined based on the accounts I'd heard. It was a golden light, warm and welcoming. It emanated a sense of peace and well-being that I had never experienced before. As I moved toward the light, I began to hear sounds. At first, they were just distant murmurs, but gradually they became clearer. They were voices, thousands of them, all speaking at the same time. But somehow it wasn't chaotic or disturbing. It was like a harmonious symphony, each voice contributing to a larger melody that I couldn't fully comprehend. As I neared the end of the tunnel, the sense of peace intensified. All the anxiety, fear, and pain I had felt in my last conscious moments in the hospital had completely disappeared. I felt light, free from all the worries and burdens of earthly life. Finally, I reached the end of the tunnel. The golden light enveloped me completely, and for a moment I was blinded by its intensity. When my vision adjusted, I found myself standing before something that defied all the logic and reason I had cultivated throughout my life. In front of me was a magnificent building, made entirely of a material that looked like gold, but was translucent and glowed with its own light. Its architecture was unlike anything I had ever seen on Earth, with impossible arches that seemed to defy gravity and intricate patterns that shifted and changed as I watched. Standing there at the entrance of this surreal building, I knew I was about to experience something beyond human comprehension. All my life, I had sought concrete answers, tangible evidence. Now, I was standing before something that defied all rational explanation. A part of me, the skeptical detective, wanted to analyze and question everything I was seeing. But another part, a part I didn't know existed, was completely at peace, accepting everything without question. For the first time in my life, I was willing to simply experience, without trying to understand or explain. With a mix of awe and apprehension, I took a step toward the golden building. I had no idea what awaited me inside, but I knew I was about to discover truths that transcended everything I believed was possible. As I approached the golden structure, I realized that its design was even more impressive up close. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, emitting a soft glow that changed intensity in an almost hypnotic rhythm. Magnificent arches towered above me, their forms defying the laws of physics as I knew them. As I neared the entrance, I noticed there were no visible doors. It was as though the building itself was inviting me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, years of detective training making me question the wisdom of entering an unknown place. But the sense of peace that had enveloped me since I left the tunnel persisted, assuring me there was no danger. I stepped forward, and to my surprise, I passed through the wall as if it were made of air. The interior of the building was even more astounding than the exterior. The space seemed infinite, with corridors stretching in every direction. The floor beneath my feet, although I didn't really feel like I was walking, was made of a material reminiscent of marble, with golden veins that appeared to move. The ceiling, if it could be called that, was a kaleidoscope of constantly shifting colors. It was like looking at the most beautiful sky you could imagine, with auroras, nebulae, and galaxies dancing above me. As I absorbed the surreal beauty of my surroundings, I noticed a figure approaching. It was a man, or at least, it appeared to be a man. His skin had an olive tone, and he had a well-groomed beard. However, what struck me most were his eyes. They were a deep blue, and they seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. He approached me with a gentle smile, but there was a firmness in his gaze that reminded me of the most respected judges I had encountered during my career. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried undeniable authority. "Welcome, Alaric Sanderson." I was surprised to hear my name. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where was I? Who was he? What was this place? But before I could articulate any of them, he continued, "You do not belong to this place. Yet." His words left me confused. If I didn't belong here, why was I there? And what did he mean by "yet"? Once again, before I could voice my doubts, he gestured for me to follow him. We walked through the golden corridor, passing rooms and spaces that defied my understanding. At one point, I saw what appeared to be an infinite library, with books floating in the air. In another, I saw what I can only describe as a garden of light, with plants and flowers made of pure energy. Finally, we reached a pair of enormous oak doors. They seemed ancient and solid, contrasting with the ethereal nature of the rest of the building. The man opened them effortlessly, revealing a bright light on the other side. "Your journey does not end here, Alaric," he said, his voice blending with the sound of distant music that I hadn't noticed before. "There's more for you to see and experience." With a gentle gesture, he indicated that I should pass through the doors. I hesitated again, looking at him for more explanations, but his face remained serene and impassive. I understood that I would not get more answers from him. If I wanted to understand what was happening, I would have to continue my journey. With one last glance at the interior of the golden building, I stepped through the oak doors, plunging into the brilliant light beyond them. As I passed through the doors, the intense light blinded me momentarily. When my eyes adjusted, I was amazed by what I saw. Before me stretched a vast, magnificent city, bathed in a warm, golden light. It was a vision that defied any adequate description, but I will try my best to convey what I experienced. The buildings of the city were of an architecture I had never seen before. Some appeared to be made of pure crystal, reflecting and refracting the light in impossible ways. Others seemed constructed from a material resembling liquid gold, their surfaces rippling softly as if they were alive. The shapes of the buildings defied logic and gravity, with towers curving at impossible angles and bridges that seemed to float in the air. The streets were not made of asphalt or concrete, but of a material that seemed to emit its own soft light. They extended in all directions, some rising in graceful spirals, others dipping in gentle curves that disappeared from view. Parks and gardens dotted the urban landscape, but they were unlike anything I had ever seen on Earth. The trees had leaves that shimmered as if made of miniature stars, and the flowers emitted a fragrance that was both familiar and completely new. Fountains of crystal-clear water sprayed in hypnotic patterns, their droplets sparkling like diamonds in the golden light. The most astonishing thing was the sense of peace and harmony that permeated the environment. There was no noise from traffic, none of the frantic hustle and bustle we normally associate with cities. Instead, there was a soft, ethereal music, as if the city itself was singing. I began to walk through the streets, marveling at each new detail I discovered. In the distance, I saw what appeared to be people, or at least beings that resembled people. They moved with a fluid grace, almost as if they were dancing as they walked. Their forms were luminous, as if they were made of concentrated light. I tried to approach some of these beings, eager to interact, to understand more about where I was. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach them. It was as if an invisible barrier kept me separate. I tried calling out to them, but my voice made no sound. That's when the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was in this wonderful place, but I couldn't fully interact with it. I was an observer, a temporary visitor in a realm that wasn't mine. The feeling was bittersweet, wonderful to witness such beauty, but frustrating to not be able to fully participate in it. I continued my exploration, absorbing every detail I could. I saw what appeared to be schools, but unlike any educational institution I had ever known. The classrooms were open spaces where beings of light gathered in circles, seemingly sharing knowledge in ways I couldn't comprehend. I passed by places that resembled hospitals, but there was no visible pain or suffering. Instead, I saw beings of light surrounding others, their luminous forms merging in ways that suggested healing and renewal. The more I saw, the more questions filled my mind. What was this place? Was this heaven, the afterlife, or was it something completely different, beyond my understanding? As I pondered these questions, my eyes were drawn to an impressive sight on the horizon of the Golden City. A bright, white staircase rose up, seemingly endless, disappearing into the clouds above. Something about that staircase called to me, as if it was the next step in my journey. With one last look at the Golden City, I began to make my way toward the white staircase, unsure of what awaited me, but feeling that I was about to discover something even more extraordinary. I approached the base of the white staircase, feeling a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The stairs appeared to be made of pure marble, but emanated a soft light of their own. Each step was perfectly sculpted, without any flaws or signs of wear. The staircase stretched upwards, disappearing into the golden clouds above, its top invisible from where I stood. I hesitated for a moment before placing my foot on the first step. To my surprise, the step emitted a faint glow at my touch, as if responding to my presence. Encouraged by this reaction, I began to climb. As I ascended, I noticed that each step glowed momentarily beneath my feet before returning to its original state. It was as if the staircase was recording my passage, creating a path of light behind me. The climb wasn't tiring as I would have expected from such a long staircase. In fact, the higher I went, the lighter and more energized I felt. It was as though each step was cleansing me in some way, removing layers of worries and doubts I didn't even know I carried. As I climbed, the scenery around me gradually changed. The Golden City below grew smaller and smaller until it became just a glowing point in the distance. The golden clouds that had once seemed so far away now surrounded me, their ethereal forms dancing around me. At one point, I realized I could no longer see either the top or the base of the staircase. I was suspended in a realm of golden light, with only the white steps as my guide. The sensation was surreal, as if I were walking between worlds. It was then that I began to hear voices. At first, they were just indistinct whispers, but as I continued to climb, they became clearer. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was comforting, welcoming. It was as if these voices were encouraging me to keep going, assuring me that I was on the right path. As I ascended, flashes of memory began to pass through my mind. I saw moments from my life, some that I remembered clearly, others that I had long forgotten. I saw my first day at school, my graduation from the police academy, the birth of my daughter. But I also saw moments I didn't recognize. Were these glimpses of the future? The staircase seemed endless, but I didn't feel the urge to stop. Each step brought a sense of purpose, of moving closer to something important. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and only a moment, I saw something ahead. A platform, bathed in a light brighter than anything I had ever seen. As I reached the platform, I was momentarily blinded by the intensity of the light. When my eyes adjusted, I found myself in an open, circular space and with the staircase disappearing behind me. In front of me stood a figure. I can't adequately describe the appearance of this figure. It was like looking at the sun, too bright to see directly, yet impossible to ignore. The figure emanated an aura of power and love so intense that I felt completely overwhelmed. Then, the figure spoke. Not with words, but directly into my mind. A single word, my name, Alaric. In that moment, I felt as though my entire life had led to this encounter. All my doubts, my skepticism, my search for concrete answers, all seemed insignificant in the presence of this being. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but I found myself without words. What could one say in the face of such magnitude? Before I could react, I felt a shift. The light began to dim, and I felt as though I were being pulled backward. The figure in front of me began to fade, and I heard the words again. Alaric, it is not your time yet. And then, everything went dark. I felt as though I was falling, tumbling through the darkness, leaving behind the white staircase, the golden city, everything I had experienced. I was returning, but to where? The darkness that enveloped me after leaving the top of the white staircase didn't last long. Gradually, I began to feel a soft breeze caressing my face and the sweet aroma of flowers in the air. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a completely different setting. I was on a winding path, lined with flowers of every imaginable color. The path was made of smooth, rounded stones, each one emitting a faint glow, as if it had absorbed the sunlight. Majestic trees rose on either side, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. The sky above was a deep, vibrant blue, dotted with clouds that looked like cotton candy. In the distance, I heard the gentle sound of flowing water. A river, perhaps. I began walking along the path, marveling at the beauty around me. The flowers seemed to lean toward me as I passed, as if they were greeting me. The air was filled with butterflies and small, colorful birds, flying in mesmerizing patterns. As I walked, I noticed that the path wasn't straight, but curved gently, revealing new wonders with each turn. At one point, I saw a small, crystal-clear lake, its waters so transparent that I could see the bottom covered in gemstones. In another moment, I passed through a grove where the trees had silver trunks and golden leaves. The peace I felt in this place was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of worry or fear, but a positive sense of contentment and absolute harmony. For the first time in my life, I felt that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I walked, I began to hear distant laughter. The sound was joyful and carefree, like that of children playing. Curious, I quickened my pace in the direction of the sound. Rounding a bend in the path, I saw a clearing ahead. In the center of the clearing was a magnificent fountain, with water that seemed to glow with its own light. Around the fountain, I saw figures, not quite human, but luminous forms that resembled people. They seemed to be in a state of pure joy, dancing and playing around the fountain. I stood there, watching the scene in awe. It was then that I noticed a boy approaching me. He looked different from the other figures, more solid, more human. He had a radiant smile on his face, and his eyes sparkled with a wisdom that seemed far beyond his apparent age. The boy came up to me, extending his hand. "Come," he said, his voice melodic and joyful. "I want to show you something." Without hesitation, I took his hand. Immediately, I felt a surge of energy course through my body. It was as if the boy's touch had connected me more deeply to this wonderful place. He led me along the path, past the fountain and the dancing figures. We arrived at another building, different from the golden one I had seen earlier. This one seemed to be made of pure crystal, reflecting and refracting light in impossible ways. The boy led me inside the building. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. We saw rooms filled with books floating in the air, musical instruments playing by themselves, and windows showing scenes from other worlds. Finally, we reached a room where several luminous figures were sitting near what seemed to be the bank of a river of light. The boy turned to me, his smile now a bit sad. "Your room is not ready yet," he said softly. "You cannot stay here." Before I could respond or ask any questions, I felt that falling sensation again. The world around me began to fade, the colors blending into a whirlwind of light. The last thing I saw was the boy's smiling face, waving goodbye. And then, once again, I was engulfed by darkness. The darkness that surrounded me this time was different. It wasn't the absolute, oppressive darkness I had experienced before, but something softer, more like a deep twilight. I floated in this space for an indeterminate amount of time, feeling suspended between realities. Gradually, I began to notice small points of light appearing around me. At first, they were just distant sparks, but soon they became brighter and closer. I realized they were orbs of light, each one pulsating with a unique energy. The orbs varied in size and color. Some were the size of marbles, others as large as balloons. Their colors ranged from pure white to gold, with shades of blue, green, and violet. Each orb seemed to contain a miniature universe, with complex patterns of light dancing within them. One of the orbs, a deep and shimmering blue, began to move toward me. As it approached, I felt an energy emanating from it. It wasn't just light, but something alive, conscious. The orb stopped a few inches from me, pulsing gently. Suddenly, I felt a presence in my mind. It wasn't exactly words, but impressions, feelings, memories that weren't mine. It was as if the orb was communicating directly with my consciousness, sharing its essence with me. Through this silent communication, I understood that each orb represented a soul, an individual consciousness. Some were ancient, carrying the wisdom of countless lives. Others were young, full of curiosity and potential. All were connected, part of a greater whole that I could barely comprehend. The blue orb began to guide me through this ethereal space. As we moved forward, other orbs joined us, forming a kind of luminous entourage. It felt like we were dancing through the cosmos, each movement synchronized in perfect harmony. At a certain point, I noticed familiar forms materializing in the distance. As we got closer, I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years. My mother-in-law, who had passed away a decade ago, my parents, whom I had lost when I was younger, my sister, who had left too soon. My heart filled with emotion at the sight of them. I wanted to run to them, embrace them, tell them how much I missed them. But something held me back, an invisible barrier I couldn't cross. They were there, so close, yet unreachable. Their faces were serene, gentle smiles directed at me. They didn't speak, but their eyes conveyed messages of love, forgiveness, and understanding. It was as if they were telling me that everything was okay, that they were at peace and that we would meet again one day. As I absorbed this silent reunion, something extraordinary happened. A light orb, much brighter than the others, suddenly appeared. Its light was so intense that it overshadowed everything around it. It moved quickly toward me, stopping abruptly in front of me. The communication with this orb was different. Instead of vague impressions, I received a clear and direct message. Tell Madison at the salon that her grandfather is well. The message caught me by surprise. I didn't know any Madison, nor did I know what salon the message referred to. Before I could question or ask for more information, the bright orb disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I was stunned, trying to process what had just happened. The blue orb guiding me approached again. This time, the message I received was clear. Your journey here is coming to an end. It's time to return. I felt a mix of emotions, sadness at having to leave this wonderful place, anxiety about what awaited me, but also a strange sense of purpose. I had a message to deliver, although I didn't know to whom or how. The orbs around me slowly began to drift away. The figures of my loved ones faded into the distance. Darkness began to thicken again. But this time it wasn't frightening. It was like a soft mantle enveloping me, guiding me back. As I felt my consciousness shifting, pulling me back to the world I knew, I carried with me the memories of this incredible place, the sensations of peace and connection, and the mysterious message that had been entrusted to me. My journey through the beyond was coming to an end, but something told me that my true journey was only just beginning. The transition back to consciousness was gradual and disorienting. First came the sensation. I felt the weight of my body again, something I had forgotten during my ethereal journey. There was pain, not sharp, but a dull ache that permeated every part of my being. Then came the sounds, the rhythmic beep of machines, muffled voices, the constant hum of medical equipment. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The light was intense, almost painful after the time I had spent in the soft luminescence of the beyond. I blinked several times, trying to focus my vision. Gradually, the world around me came into shape. I was in a hospital room. The walls were a sterile white, so different from the golden and ethereal tones I had experienced. Tubes and wires were connected to my body, attached to machines that monitored my vital signs. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy and unresponsive. That's when I noticed a figure beside my bed. My daughter, Eleanor. She was sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, her face showing signs of exhaustion and worry. I wanted to call out to her, to tell her that I was okay, that I had returned, but my throat was dry and scratchy. All I could manage was a low groan. That small sound was enough to wake her. Her eyes opened suddenly, focusing on me. For a moment, she was frozen, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then, tears began to stream down her face. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Dad, you're awake?" She quickly stood up, pressing a button to call the nurse. Within seconds, the room was filled with doctors and nurses, all talking at once, checking monitors, asking questions. I learned that I had been in a coma for 4 weeks. The doctors were shocked by my recovery. Apparently, my chances of survival had been minimal. They spoke of a medical miracle and an inexplicable recovery. While the doctors examined me, my mind was elsewhere. The memories of my journey were still vivid. The tunnel, the golden building, the ethereal city, the white staircase, the flower-lined path, the orbs of light. Everything seemed so real, so tangible. How could it have been just a dream or hallucination? When we were finally alone, Eleanor held my hand, her eyes still shining with tears of relief. "Dad, we almost lost you," she said softly. "The doctors, they said it was only a matter of time, but I didn't give up. I knew you'd come back to us." I tried to speak, my voice hoarse and weak. "Eleanor," I managed to say, I experienced." She leaned in closer, curious. "What, Dad?" "What did you see?" And so, with a trembling voice and frequent pauses to catch my breath, I began to tell my story. I spoke of the tunnel, the light, the golden city. I described the white staircase and the flowered path. I recounted the orbs of light and the figures I had seen. Eleanor listened in silence, her eyes widening as I described scenes and experiences that defied logic and reason. She didn't interrupt, didn't question. She just listened attentively as I poured out everything I had experienced. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, that's incredible. I don't know what to say." I understood her hesitation. After all, I was still trying to process everything that had happened myself. How could I expect anyone else to understand or believe? "Eleanor," I said, weakly squeezing her hand, "I know it sounds crazy. I know it goes against everything I've always believed. But I swear to you, it was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced." She nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. "Dad, I know you. I know you've always been a skeptic. Always sought logical explanations for everything. If you say this happened, well, who am I to doubt?" I felt a wave of gratitude for her understanding. But there was something else, something I needed to do. "Eleanor," I said, "there's one thing I need to ask of you. I need to find someone named Madison. I have a message for her." In the months that followed my discharge from the hospital, my life changed drastically. The experience I had during my coma fundamentally altered my worldview. I, who had always been a staunch skeptic, now found myself contemplating questions of spirituality and the afterlife. My physical recovery was surprisingly fast, considering the severity of my condition. The doctors spoke of a medical miracle, but I knew there was something deeper at play. Each day brought a new appreciation for life, a gratitude I had never felt before. But amid this new perspective, there was one question that continued to intrigue me. The mysterious message I had received from Madison. Who was she? How could I find her? Eleanor, always practical, suggested we start by looking for Madisons in the Pensacola area. We made calls, searched online, but nothing seemed to fit. I began to wonder if I had imagined that part of my experience. Then, one ordinary morning, about 6 months after I was discharged from the hospital, I noticed something on the kitchen table that caught my attention. It was a business card. Madison Quinn, hairstylist, it read. A shiver ran down my spine. "Eleanor," I called, my voice trembling with emotion. "Where did this card come from?" My daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking puzzled. "Oh, that. I picked it up yesterday at the supermarket. I was thinking about changing my look, you know." With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. After a few rings, a cheerful voice answered, "Madison's Salon, how can I help you?" I made an appointment for that afternoon, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived at the salon, I was greeted by a young woman with a bright smile. "You must be Mr. Sanderson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Madison. How can I help you today?" I sat in the salon chair, observing Madison through the mirror. She looked so young, so full of life. How could she be connected to my near-death experience? As she prepared her tools, I started to make casual conversation. "Madison, do you have family in the area?" She smiled. "Oh, yes. I was born and raised here in Pensacola. My whole family is around here." I took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Madison, this might sound strange, but did your grandfather pass away recently?" She stopped what she was doing, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Yes," she said slowly. "My grandfather John passed away 3 years ago. He was a war veteran." "How did you know?" My heart raced. "Madison, this is going to sound unbelievable, but I need to tell you something. A few months ago, I had a near-death experience, and so I told her about my journey, about the orbs of light, and finally, about the message I had received. A very bright orb of light told me to tell Madison at the salon that her grandfather is well." Madison's face paled. She sat heavily in a nearby chair, her eyes fixed on me. That's impossible," she whispered. "Why?" I asked gently. Tears began to form in her eyes. "Because my grandfather always said that if there was life after death, he would find a way to send me a message. It was a joke between us. I'd tell him it was impossible, and he'd laugh and say, 'Wait and see, Maddie. I'll find a way.'" We sat in silence for a long moment, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Madison spoke again, her voice trembling but filled with a kind of awe. "Mr. Sanderson, I don't know how to thank you. This means more to me than you can imagine." At that moment, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The message had been delivered. My journey, which had begun in that hospital bed months ago, was finally coming to an end. But, in truth, it was only the beginning. My near-death experience and this encounter with Madison had opened my eyes to a world of possibilities I had never considered before. Life, death, the beyond, all of it now seemed part of a much larger and more beautiful mystery than I had ever imagined. I left the salon that day with more than just a new haircut. I left with a new perspective on life, death, and the connections that unite us beyond the limits of what we can see or touch. My journey as a detective may have ended, but a new journey was just beginning. A journey of spiritual exploration, of seeking answers to questions I had never thought to ask. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of the unknown. On the contrary, I was eager to explore, to learn, to understand. In the years that followed, I dedicated myself to studying other near-death experiences, exploring different spiritual philosophies, meditating, and seeking a deeper connection with that realm I had briefly glimpsed. I didn't abandon my critical thinking or my search for evidence, after all. Once a detective, always a detective. But now, my definition of evidence had expanded. I began giving talks about my experience, sharing my story with others. To my surprise, many people related to aspects of what I had gone through. Some even shared their own near-death experiences with me, experiences they had been afraid to tell others for fear of being ridiculed. Madison and I stayed in touch. She became a close friend, a constant reminder of the incredible connection that had brought me back to life with a purpose. Through her, I met other people who had lost loved ones and were seeking comfort and meaning. I realized that my experience wasn't just about me. It was about bringing hope and comfort to others. Eleanor, my daughter, was my biggest supporter on this new journey. She helped me organize my memories into a book, which was eventually published and touched the lives of many people. Beyond the Tunnel, A Skeptic's Journey Through the Afterlife, became an unexpected bestseller, opening doors to wider discussions about life, death, and what might exist between them. Of course, not everyone accepted my story. I faced skepticism, ridicule, and even hostility from some quarters. Ironically, I understood those reactions perfectly. After all, not long ago, I would have been the first to dismiss a story like mine as fantasy or hallucination. But now, at 75 years old, looking back on my life, I cannot deny the profound transformation I have experienced. The near-death experience wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that has taught me more about life than all my previous years combined. Today, I am no longer afraid of death. I know that when my time here ends, it will only be the start of a new journey. I am curious about what awaits me on the other side, but I am in no hurry to find out. There is still much to do, much to learn, much to experience on this side of the veil. My message to those who read my story is simple. Keep your minds and hearts open. There is more to this universe than we can understand with our limited human perception. Life is a wonderful mystery, full of possibilities that go beyond our imagination. And for those who are struggling, who fear death, or who have lost loved ones, I say, there is hope. There is a continuity that transcends our physical existence. Love, the connections we form, the lives we touch, all of it persists in ways we can barely begin to understand. My near-death experience taught me that life is precious. Every moment is a gift. But it also showed me that what we call death is just a transition, a passage to something beyond our current comprehension. As I write these final words, I feel a deep gratitude for the life I've lived, for the people I love, for the experiences that have shaped me, and I feel a serene anticipation for what is to come, whether in this life or the next. For now, I know, with a certainty that transcends logic and reason, that our journey does not end with the last heartbeat. It is only the beginning of a new adventure, one that we will all embark on one day. And when that day comes, I will not be afraid. I will be ready to once again walk through the Golden City, climb the white staircase, and explore the mysteries of the beyond. Until then, I will live each day fully, with gratitude, love, and a sense of wonder for the incredible mystery that is existence. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you can watch every new video and help us spread this message to more people. See you next time.